Okay, welcome to the next episode of the Exchange Podcast. I'm Kevin Warmhold. Thank you for joining me tonight. I do want to give a shout out. We have a sponsor for the show today is Back to Blue New York. You go to Back to Blue New York. That's backtobluenewyork.com. It's a Long Island-based small business with a mission in mind: raise and give back as much as possible, something that we all like here on this network. A portion of the proceeds are donated to law enforcement charities. You can follow them on Instagram at backtobluenewyork.inc and Facebook at backtobluenewyork.inc. Easy, simple. Go to Back to Blue. They have an awesome designer who designed some great T-shirts. If you are pro law enforcement, if you are law enforcement, go there and get some T-shirts for you, your family, your kids. They got all sizes, all shapes, including big shape, round shapes like myself. I could get a T-shirt there, no problem. Today, I have a wonderful guest. It's very important subject matter, something that we cover a lot on this podcast with a lot of my guests. We dive into politics from here and then. This is something a little bit more important. This is about saving people's jobs. I want to bring in today, I have Brian Urban. He is the HPWO training coordinator. Your job is a refractory bricks mason. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you work with Intalco Works, which is Ferndale, Washington. So you're coming to us from Washington. How are things out in Washington? These last couple of months have been pretty intense. How are things out there?
We're doing pretty good. Everybody's holding together as best they can. It's amazing to see how many people are joining in the fight to keep this place open, and how much realization people have come to about how important aluminum is in the industry.
And with the pandemic, I'm sure there's been a lot of other challenges that you guys have had to overcome. But I want to get a little bit into what you guys are facing. Ferndale, Washington is a small town or city. Is it considered a city or a small town of 14,000 people? Medium household incomes about $64,000 a year. Very it's that American town that you want to live in. I've seen some photos in my research coming up to this podcast, and I was very impressed. It looks like an awesome little town. And you guys are up against a real struggle. July 2020 was a preliminary date where you and 700 fellow employees may be facing termination. First off, what kind of business do you guys do? What do you do? What kind of manufacturing industry are you in?
We're an aluminum smelter out here. We make aluminum, and also we have a complex cast house to do foundries and heat treating of our alloys and everything. And been in operation for over 50 years now. And this is not the first time they looked at that shutting us down. It's been an uphill battle and fighting. The COVID-19 definitely didn't help things out, with the lowering of the LME prices and shutting down of businesses that actually use our product. So definitely didn't help that out. Prior to the COVID-19, there were 2 aluminum smelters being considered for closure due to the low LME prices, mainly due to the major oversaturation from China into the aluminum industry. Which, I mean, it's hard to compete with a company, based out of China, where they're subsidized by power from China. They don't have the same anything. It's not the same playing field. Average monthly income for some of these people is $168 a month versus a living working wage here in the U.S. Obviously, they don't have any of the environmental things or concerns that we do out here to try to produce environmentally conscious, products. And through the subsidization and oversaturation, they've literally just decimated and absolutely made an open, outright attack on the aluminum in the U.S. here, which is a primary metal.
And it's also it's a strategic resource, without question. The United States depends heavily on strategic resources to stay, top player in the world. And China is our biggest competitor, both economically, militarily. We've come to a time where they are growing at a rate that is unseen in the history of the world. I mean, they went from $100 billion GDP to $2 trillion, now $4 trillion, and by 2025 they're supposed to surpass the United States economy. It's because of things like this. Now, when the president got elected, he declared basically a trade war on China by putting tariffs in place. That's something that a lot of people argue over, whether the free market's better or tariffs. Now, you in an industry that is so vital to this country, how did the tariffs play a role in this initially when the tariffs first went in place to try to cut down the competition from China? Because we see that they do mess with the prices, their manipulation of currency. So how did the initial tariff play a role in your business?
Initially, the tariffs were helping us out and definitely boosted us to try to level the playing field somewhat with China. However, in typical fashion, there's always going to be lobbying and people that are against it to try to get design around, and that has happened coming in through China, through Mexico to the U.S. and China to Canada to the U.S. There's definitely some major issues now going on at the tariffs. They have things that they've exceptions they've made for these people. There is something in place that's supposed to stop that. It's called AIM system, which is the Aluminum Import Monitoring and Analysis. The AIM system is supposed to be implemented and provide a quick, effective tool to identify import surges and duty evasions that threaten the U.S. aluminum industry. But the reality is there's a little bit of a lag time in that because they obviously have to report back and everything. So you can see lag about 30 days. But it really hasn't come into play yet. And Canada still continues to bring in their aluminum without those tariffs going back on it. At the time, more than 60% in the aluminum made in Canada is brought into the U.S., and they rose from 119,000 metric tons a year to about 163,000 metric tons a year, and nearly 230 in July. So coming up in July is what they're expected. So the reality is that the tariffs did initially work, but people lobby and companies lobby to get around that kind of stuff, and that has happened. And we need to get the AIM pushed back and allow them to do their job and to level the playing field.
Now, Alcoa is the parent company that controls. I looked on their website. They have a bunch. They're involved in a lot of resources, not just aluminum. First, you know what? Let's explain, because most people like me, I'm a moron when it comes to aluminum and how it's made and all that stuff. And most Americans don't understand. What is the process of what you guys deal with on a daily basis? How you guys, where do you receive the initial product? You guys melt it down, and where does it go?
So we actually get alumina ore shipped to us via cargo ships or ships that come out of Australia, bring it directly into our deepwater port. It's then unloaded into silos, and then those silos are then filtered and taken out to the other silos, to the pot lines, where they get into the pots. And the pots are essentially big carbon blocks that pass electricity through the carbon to the pot itself, and that chemical reaction takes the alumina and turns it into aluminum, or as the British say, aluminium.
Now, it amazes me how somebody even thought of this whole process. Now, you guys take it and melt it down at this facility in Ferndale, Washington. Is that correct? Where does it go from? It goes distributed to what? What products is your aluminum in? Would be
awesome. Our products are in everything from critical infrastructures for buildings to planes to automobiles and everything else like that. And we actually make aluminum. Aluminum doesn't come to us to be melted down. Alumina does. So we actually make the product ourselves. And then we have a direct rail spur, which allows us to ship, which is the most economically and environmentally conscious surface transportation in the world, of our direct rail spur to all of our countries all over the great nation, especially here on the West Coast. And we also do have what's called a remelt furnace, which allows us to take and remelt scrap aluminum and recycled aluminum, which is an amazing opportunity because it takes less than 5% of the investment of energy to restore and recycle aluminum. So it is extremely cost effective, and it's environmentally conscious to do the recycling. We're on the West Coast. We have an opportunity to service to California. And additionally to that is an interesting stat is about approximately 75% of all aluminum that was ever made and been created is still in use today. And because the metal is so unique, it can be recycled over and over and over again. It never loses its original size and quantity. And it's just one of those things that, you know, we have this opportunity in front of us to produce clean, energy friendly and environmentally conscious aluminum, which begs the question, especially for people that are against industry, why would you bypass an opportunity for an industry here in the United States that can do it environmentally soundly and continue to produce this metal for our nation, which we shouldn't be relying on outside countries for.
And that is a great point. When I first heard about the situation there, I said to myself, just because of what you see in the news these days, I said, this must be some environmental chokehold on the industry, because I'm thinking maybe aluminum, the process to make it is dirty, and transport the product nationwide might cause pollution. That'd be something that would, but after, you explaining that, it seems to be a pretty clean cut, process that doesn't affect the environment in a negative way, at least compared to other things that we already do. And the railway system, which is something that gets neglected all the time, especially when talking about oil and moving products across the country, it is one of the cleanest ways to do it. And they're always coming down. It's a vital resource to the country. It's vital to utilize the transportation system that you do. And, me, when I first learned of this, I said to myself, this must be something with maybe the Green New Deal people want to, destroy this industry here and just let it happen in China. Now, in some of my research, and correct me if I'm wrong, 44 million tons are produced in China every year. The United States puts out about 1.8 million, but you told me before we started recording is about 1.3 million tons of product.
Yeah.
Like you said, those go and could be reused. 75% is reusable over time. Is that enough? The 1.3 million that we're making here? Are we even making enough here to begin with, where we should be shutting down jobs? That would be my question.
No, we right now we produce far less than what the national need is for aluminum, and that's a huge problem for us. Alumina is one of the most abundant minerals on Earth after oxygen and silicon, and is the most abundant metal found naturally on Earth. It is one of those things that we definitely need to keep and bring back right here. It makes up about 8.2% of the Earth's crust. It is an unlimited amount of recyclable metal. It's one of the most green metals because it takes 5% of the energy, like I said, but it's one of those that is absolutely critical. For example, Boeing planes, if you've ever ridden in a 747, that's 147,000 pounds of aluminum flying through the air. You look at some of our radars that are built, our armored cars and everything else. We are not keeping up with the demand just to supply the U.S. right now. And that's a problem, that's an issue, and that's a national security issue.
It is. And we seem to be given our resources and put in the hands, like this COVID crisis taught us a lesson. 85% of our pharmaceuticals are made in China. So when China shuts down completely, and then a pandemic spreads worldwide, people need their medications. Even if they wanted to send it, they may not have the ability to send it. So that's something that we have to take into consideration now moving forward with dealing with the pharmaceutical industry. It should be one of my friends that I interviewed a while ago actually brought this up, that it should be considered a vital strategic resource. Medications, vital medications that people need, especially diabetics and so on and so forth. That should be considered a strategic resource at this point, because we are so dependent on these things like aluminum or alumina, right? Is the ore. Do we actually extract any out of the U.S., or is Australia the main supplier of that?
All of our alumina comes out of Australia. Alcoa actually owns the mining facilities and actually mines for it in Australia. And they sell to other countries, mainly China, for example, with over 140 smelters. So I get the dynamics. There's some bigger picture things of the corporate structure and everything. I understand that, but being an American-based company, I'm holding out to be hopeful that Mr. Harvey definitely rethinks this move and continues to smelt here at Intalco. And on that note, Intalco actually started introducing their point feed pot systems, for example. And you made a comment about environmentally conscious and a green aluminum, and the truth is, it is. The process, which we've already started the retrofit on, reduces our overall emissions by over 90%. And bang for your buck, as far as investments and everything from the government goes to lower your carbon footprint or your pollution or anything else like that. There is nothing else in the state that compares to the opportunity right here at Intalco to produce this aluminum and have such an impact on making it cleaner and better. And I think that's something that's really undersold. is that conscientiousness, you know.
Now, we talked earlier about the tariffs, how they initially helped you. What is the loophole that was discovered in, like, now there's a tariff? What happened that allowed them to find a loophole to kind of circumvent the system that was put in place to save your jobs, to help you guys? What was the maneuver? Because obviously something had to be done to basically, the tariffs are meant to protect your jobs, to bring your industry back.
Absolutely. So what happened was there was immediately after Section 232, exemption was granted on imports from Canada, and that was when we saw the rise and the spike in aluminum and everything. And there was supposed to be safeguards put in place to allow that up, because obviously we don't produce enough aluminum initially. But the APAA, for example, American Primary Aluminum Association, was calling on Trump, and as were we and everybody else that was out here, to reimpose those exemptions and get rid of them, because Canada is supposed to be honoring those surges and supposed to go back to tariffs and stop saturating the market, which they haven't done. So there is a safety measure in place that is not being utilized, and I think there's some dirty business being done there. I know there is, because you see people on anybody in the U.S. that lobbies to allow a primary metal to come in, that has none of the sanctions of environmentally conscientiousness or any of those things. I think you're doing a disservice. Just because it doesn't happen in your own backyard doesn't mean you should be ignoring it, you know. And if these people that promote these exemptions, that's pretty ridiculous. It's kind of as long as I don't see it, it isn't happening. I mean, you promote a country that has such bad pollution and issues, and you talk about human rights and workers' ability to pay for their family and everything, and that's just completely out the window. So I don't truly get the standpoint how anybody can stand up with a straight face and lobby around these types of tariffs when they're put in place to level the playing field across the board. And it's not that I'm a huge person when it comes to saying subsidizations from the government. I'm not. I believe in the free market greatly, but the free market also has to have a set of rules that we all play from. And if we're not playing by the same set of rules, it's not a level playing field. So there was some lobbying, not to get into that too much. I know that there's some people out there that were involved with it that are trying to help a little bit on the back end of things. Mistakes can be made, I get that, but we definitely need all hands on deck and fighting together to move this back to the realm of controllable and make our goal attainable.
Right. And this is something that came pre-coronavirus. So this isn't an issue that was just came up in the last few months because of the virus, because let's face it, it's going to cripple our economy for a while. We have a lot of work to do to get it back up. The country's starting to open back up. A couple of things that you mentioned that I want to touch on. It seems that, everybody's got standards until there's money involved. So everybody's out to help and take care of the working man. But once there's a deal where somebody can make money, that's something. And that falls into that crony capitalism where, somebody's able to, the free market is the free market. We don't have a truly free market because of all the BS and lobbying that goes on behind doors. They tell you they're going to help you. And then, when money comes, standards go out the window, and they did their best, but the important thing is we have 700 employees that are about to lose their jobs in an industry that is vital to the national security. There are only 7 smelting plants left in the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, owned by 3 companies. That's correct.
So 3 companies and 7 plants hold the power. God forbid China decides they don't want to cooperate with us anymore. They have the other capability to produce as much as they want and melt down as much alumini to aluminum as much as they want, correct?
Yeah.
So it seems like a pretty important thing that we should be focused on.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the, I don't know if you're into airplanes or not, prior military, but the F-35, for example, and F-18 get entirely their aluminum from a single smelter here in the U.S. that's operating less than 40% capacity. And we look at those kind of things, and that's like, holy cow. You look at down in Mexico, there was a billionaire that just got caught stockpiling this aluminum that was more than the annual consumption. I mean, it's ridiculous to believe that it's not, as serious as it is for our military, for our sovereignty, and for national security.
And this is something that I like. We should be self-sufficient and not dependent on anybody. We have seen the last 30, 40 years, jobs go overseas. You know, we're trying to get it back here. It's very hard because of how politicized everything is. Politics plays into every single industry, and especially with strategic resources. And it's a shame. Now, China having the capability that they do have, how dangerous is that for us? That the fact that they control most of the, how much aluminum do they use per year, and where do they distribute? Is it internal, or do they trade with the rest of the world as well? Do we buy most of their aluminum?
I couldn't speak to where everything goes because so much of the stuff that happens with China is kind of under the table and back behind doors and whatnot. You can look at their assets and their investments that they're doing in Africa to India and all over the world. To try and track all that stuff down, that'd be pretty arduous. Definitely don't have that kind of time to go into it. But I do know that it's by design that it's coming into the country. China. We've already seen what it means to be over-reliant on them, especially during this COVID crisis. You look at our medicines, prescriptions and whatnot that come from China, which, by the way, aluminum is used as a barrier because it's antimicrobial and keeps the moisture out of those little pockets the pills come in. It is unfortunate that the government of China since joining us in 2001, has just had this intent on them to take over everything they possibly could. And they're doing that. It's amazing that this hasn't come up sooner. And then President Trump has an opportunity to save the aluminum industry in the United States through the Defense Production Act. Title III, it used it back in 2000. There was a beryllium smelter. There's an opportunity for stockpiling and making DoD, buy American aluminum, and then also a reinvestment of power. Where we get our power from here at Intalco is hydroelectric, which is an amazing source of energy. It's not coal. It's environmentally conscious and everything else. And I know that there's going to be people that push back on that, but the reality is it's a sustainable energy that we can use that's in place. And if we could get a better contract, a realistic contract, not penalized for using too much energy to produce this critical metal, we could be on the worldwide spectrum a competitor in the aluminum industry. And China, you look at quality of aluminum coming out of there, it's definitely below grade. That
was going to be my next question, because when they were shipping a lot of steel that they found out was not made up to code. Is it a similar thing with aluminum?
Yeah, there's you never like to laugh or snicker at somebody's misfortune or anything, but there was a contract for aluminum that came out, and the aluminum came from China, and after an extended period of outside, it had rust on it from a high iron content in the aluminum, which should not be happening, obviously. There's a huge issue with quality control coming out of China, and it's not going to get better.
Yeah, that's something that always, when something gets so big, quality control gets lost. Aluminum. Now, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here and help me understand this. Aluminum prices are down 20% this year, 45% since 2019. What is the reason for the prices getting so low? Is it because the Chinese are manipulating the value of or are they overproducing, underproducing?
Way overproducing. The saturation of the market is a direct reflection in the LME. LME is where we get our metals value from out of England there, and the oversaturation. I mean, it's well, if I have a major surplus, you look at the oil industry right now as well. You have this major surplus that hits the industry, designed to, whatever political prerogative that those countries have, it makes a huge impact on the final cost of things. They are supplying over 60% of the world's aluminum, and they had that. That's by design. They're adding more smelters. They're not dialing back. They're adding more smelters, and they have an opportunity for rapid expansion that we don't in the United States. And they're going to keep doing that. And as long as they keep the price down, how do we compete against government subsidized coal power and dirty power that they have over there, and $168 a month? And a subpar product to our American wage jobs with environmentally conscious practices and so on and so forth. It's not a level playing field, and they've been using it to their advantage for far too long.
Now, oil dependency was an issue that we had, 10, 15, 20 years ago, for a while now. But over the past 4 years, we've cut our dependence on Middle East oil. And you see prices drop. And when there's an issue with Iran and you have a Yemenis conflict, civil war going on with Saudi Arabia, which you would think would increase the price, we still managed to have like the lowest cost of gas in forever, since I was like in high school. Is there a way that we could do that with the aluminum industry where we could kind of control the narrative?
Absolutely.
So how do we do that?
So one is reimpose the tariffs of aluminum coming into it that levels a playing field, that there's going to be tax and everything else like that for the expectation that they're bringing in the same aluminum. Two would be to invest into retrofitting and updating and modernizing of our aluminum smelters in the U.S., which directly affects our ability to produce this metal for national security purposes. Renegotiate a BPA contract, a realistic ideology of expenditures and usage of power for people out there. A lot of people have a misconception that you should be charged more for the more energy used to try to keep your energy down. There is a blanket of it's going to take X amount of electricity to make this aluminum. And that needs to be understood and that needs to be supported. And when you have those things coming into play, then you have the Stockpile Act that the president can use, which means we stockpile just like we do oil for this primary metal, and we use it for defense production. And I hope President Trump looks at this very closely. I think I do believe he's a savvy man. I think he's a businessman that understands this kind of stuff. I know a lot of people naysayed the tariffs, but the reality is we got a little bit more longevity in our life here at Intalco from those initial tariffs. And if they could go back in place and protect it, I think we have a chance. We do have a chance.
So you think that the initial tariffs already has prolonged your employees
Absolutely.
continuing to work?
Absolutely.
But like everything else, there's always they just find another way to screw you. I mean, it's unbelievable. Couple of things. When you said Defense Production Act, what do you mean by that? You mean just utilizing these resources for the increase of, because they increased the defense budget to create more F-35s, buy more planes, aircraft. Are you talking about that, or utilizing the Defense Production Act that he put in play to for the ventilators and stuff like that?
So Defense Production Act is something that allows the president to make basically usage of saying this is critical, we have to have this, and it's actually the Defense Production Act Title III, and that can be used in a myriad of different circumstances for things that he identifies as being critical infrastructure, national security, and so on and so forth. And so it's not just a finite one thing, one industry. It can be used across the board, from ventilators to beryllium smelters to anything that is needed directly for the defense of this great nation.
Can you use something like that to open closed facilities?
Yes.
Are there facilities already across the country that have been closed down that could be with a little bit of investment get fire started right back up and get back to work?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I can't speak to the entirety of it, as I'm not, it's outside of my pay grade.
No.
But it can be utilized to force companies to stay open. It can be utilized to change hands, force what the turnout or production is from a facility. It's really in place, literally like it sounds, Defense Production Act, to protect this nation of stuff that is majorly impacting and could have extreme detriment if not responded to in a timely fashion.
Energy, you said it costs a lot of energy to get this process done.
It does.
What could be done to decrease that cost? What would be something that you could request the local government to do, or is this a national thing?
Actually, it's a national thing from BPA, which is Army Corps of Engineers, from our power plant, Bonneville Power Administration. And so that is more on the federal side of it. But there is great opportunity there, which we need state support as well. And that is more on the recycling side of it, using our surface railway and our spur out here to take, recycled aluminum. And we have the capability here on site to expand our remelt operations for recycling. But obviously that is a state level and federal level. there's a lot of I'm learning a lot more about politics the more I dive into this,
Mhm.
and realizing there's a reason I'm a brick mason. But
I'm
nonetheless,
with you, man. I try to figure, like, it's almost like they make it so complicated so you can't fix the problem. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's almost intentionally that plan. So, the normal guy just doesn't, it's like, you know what, screw it, let them deal with it. But now
yeah.
when it affects your job, you got to, like, it's a fight you got to do.
Absolutely. I've been trying to get savvy on it as much as I can, and I went to public school, so don't hold that against me. But we have had some great political support locally, on both sides of the aisle to some degree. But primarily, the person fighting for us out here on the political side has been Senator Doug Erickson. He has done this more than one time. Every time the plant is got an issue or a hiccup or something, he's come to our aid and battled through a lot of stuff. And one of the things I love about being able to work with a gentleman like that is, of course, we all have our own politics, right side, left side, whatever. I don't care. Right now, I care about the 700 men and women that work out here, the 2,100 additional that they're out there going to be affected directly by it, and the United States, that's my country and my home, not having the metal to keep us sovereign, because we shouldn't be reliant on other places. Doug Erickson has time and time again said we need to put politics aside. We need to focus on what the issue is at hand, and that is primary metals in the United States, and keeping the aluminum industry so we have our sovereignty when it comes to aluminum. And he is willing and open to talk to both sides of the aisle. Another one, Luann Van Werven, has been exceptional with us, done a lot above and beyond. Big thanks to those two. We have some support from the other side of the aisle, more in the lines of the Trade Act for if the place closes down, getting training for everybody. And I've been in a couple meetings, and I've heard Senator Erickson speak where he stops and it doesn't allow it to become a partisan discussion. He says, we need both sides. We need to have them doing that. We appreciate that very much. Thank you for doing that. And that's someone that has someone that has my respect.
NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. How does that affect you guys? Is that better, or because there's been some changes in that? So I want to get your take on that, and then we'll wrap up with the trickle down effect. But yeah, tell me about this NAFTA plan and how that.
Absolutely. So I love that the last portion of NAFTA is the free trade, and that cracks me up because anyways. So the issues we got is we're a primary metal, right? Which means we just made the metal. That's what we're selling. That's what our product is. NAFTA doesn't cover the concessions for bringing in a finished product of aluminum. So if they change it from a primary metal to an alloy or to something else, or they pour car blocks or they make whatever, and then they bring it in, that is no longer a primary metal and no longer governed by the same group of rules that we are under a primary metal, and the tariffs don't work. So I'm not a big fan. I was a big fan of a president, whether you love him or hate him. You can't disagree that he wants America to be first in his books, which I think he's shown. But it's definitely not been a help to us.
Yeah. So, because I was always curious, because you never see the detail points, and like what you just said, how they're able to take and manipulate the product and get a different finished product, and therefore it doesn't hold to the same rules.
Yeah.
It's one of those loopholes that it drives me crazy. I want to end on the trickle down effect, because now you guys are facing this in your home state of Washington. Like I said, it is a small town of 14,000 people. 700 jobs is huge to a town like that. It could devastate the local economy. I mean, this is everybody's paycheck we're talking about. This doesn't just end there. It trickles across the whole country. Explain how that can happen. And New York, where we are here in New York, has a huge plant here, and we could be affected by this as well.
Actually, I think you guys will be. Alcoa has a facility in New York. The trickle down effect is this: we're a primary metal. We're not producing what the nation uses and needs at this time, and we're becoming more and more reliant on a third party or another country, for that matter. The jobs, look, I can't say enough good stuff. I work with some people out here that from all walks of life. Some of these people have gone to bat for me personally and have become some of my best friends and family to me, and I appreciate that. But the truth is that 700 jobs in the scheme of things is not the big picture. Yes, it's important. Yes, I'm going to fight like hell to get these guys to keep their jobs. They would do no different from me. They're doing it every day by going out to the pot lines and doing their work in the cast house and in the carbon plant. But the reality is that 33 million out of work. What makes us different? Why does 700 jobs matter more than 33 million? I don't think it matters more in the sense that everybody's job matters to them because they have to provide and we all need to. But when it directly relates to an issue of national security, an issue of primary metal and being reliant on something like that from another country, that can't happen. We have to address this. And I have come to terms that, Intalco, we may not win this fight right now. And that sucks. But I'll be damned if I'm not going to make sure that I get the word out there for the United States to understand that the aluminum primary metals is something of national security, and we have to get the attention, and we have to be addressed, and we need to take care of this. And I will continue to open my mouth even after this place starts to curtail, and if it goes through full curtailment, I'm going to still be in that fight because I do believe in it.
And you got to keep fighting. That's what we're made of. We're made to fight, and no matter how hard it's going to be. And I really hope that this opens up people's minds to, like, listen, you mentioned 33 million people are out of work right now. All those jobs, aluminum plays into everything. It's used in everything. Restaurants, it's a part of our lives. It is a vital resource. I can't say it enough. I know I've said it over and over again. It is a vital strategic resource. It's vital for this country to function. And it blows my mind that something that could be done in China, shipped in the crates, brought into a shipping yard, transported across the country after the fact, and it still manages to be cheaper than if we just make it here, or a better product than if we just make it here. It blows my mind with not just a little bit, other products, period. I don't like to, be the isolationist or people might think, oh, you just, America first is listen, these are things that we need to not rely on other people to do for us. We actually did the right thing with oil, as much as, people argue that it's dirty energy and everything else. I'd like paying $1.90 right now for gas instead of $4 like it was a couple of years ago. It's something because now we have control. If we could do something similar with the aluminum industry and put the power back in our hands, I believe it is vital to do so. I just hate the whole politics that are involved in it to make it so difficult. Because, like you said, like they make it so hard that you don't, like, almost don't want to, get involved. But now your livelihood is on the line now, and I commend you and for what you're doing, for reaching out. And do me a favor, tell people how they could follow what's going on, where to get more information about the fight. You have any upcoming meetings that they could show their support at, rallies, anything like that? Please let the audience know.
You bet. We have a website, www.saveintalco.com. There's a Facebook, facebook.com/SaveIntalco. There's also another group out there, fightforaluminum.com. They've come into the fight and are very supportive of us. And all of our events and upcoming media events will be posted on there. And please get in the fight, and we could sure use the help.
Now, is there any donations or anything you guys are taking, like as far as costs for fighting? Is there, or is it just you guys are just pulling together, looking for support and hoping that the politicians do the right thing?
We have not taken any donations. Nobody in the movement is getting paid whatsoever for this fight. I imagine there may be a time where that comes into like a 501(c) or a nonprofit. Right now, between the IAM, which is the union that I work in, and the men and women out here on their own personal time, that's how we're funding it, and that's how we're fighting it.
Well, I want to thank you, Brian, for coming on and sharing this story. This is an important story. And if you're just sitting there listening, see what you could do. See if you could lobby your support. Call your local politicians. If you live in Washington, if you live in the area, get on the phone, call them. They're there to serve you. You're not there to work for them, and they don't, it's not a job. They serve you. So when there's an issue like this, they're supposed to go down to DC or to the state representative, whichever position they have, and fight on your behalf. And this is saving 700 jobs in this area. And just if you flood them, they can't, at some point they're going to have to do it. We got 10,000 people calling. Let's get it done. Call the politicians in the area, make sure that we get this done. And I want to thank you again, Brian, for coming on, sharing your story. I want to remind everybody who is listening to this on the audio podcast catcher, we're on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher. Give a rating, iHeartRadio. Give a rating, give a comment. We love ratings. Ratings get us pushed up the charts. Also, we're on the Exchange Podcast YouTube channel. We are part of the Liberty Caster Network, which has 8 different shows. We have Pace and Freedom podcast. We have New York Free Radio, and Larry Sharp is joining us starting. It'll be Friday. It will be his first episode, the Liberty Rant. And join our network, subscribe to us, follow us, and definitely leave us comments. We love reading them. So thank you, Brian. I hope that we can help you, and I hope this word gets out and continue to get you some support.
Thanks,
Thank
Kevin.
you very much.